A listener in England submitted this story to me about an encounter she had when she was 6. She was spending the night at a friend of her mom's house who lived right on the edge of the moors in England. The story reads, and I quote, "I was 6 years old and staying at my mom's friend's house because she was babysitting me. She lives next to the moors. I can't disclose the exact location because I don't have permission to do that, sorry. It was summer and I remember spending the whole day and night at her house. She has 2 children who are my age, so we played in the pool as well as on the slide and swing set in her huge garden all day. It was a beautiful day. I remember having a bath early that evening and then watching Alice in Wonderland in their living room with them before bed. At around 9 p.m. or so, my mom's friend took me to the spare room where I would spend the night. It was a huge room, but all that was in it was a bed and a side table with a lamp on it. The window didn't have curtains on it. I woke up early in the morning for some reason. Maybe it was because it wasn't my own bed. Anyway, everyone else was still sleeping, so I decided to look out the window. From my window, I could see a wide, grassy, open space with some woodland to the left and right. A dirt path ran right through the middle for walkers and bikers. There were lights in the garden, but they were only little garden lights, so the lighting wasn't great. I think the only reason I wound up seeing the dogman was due to the full moon. That's when I saw it. It was just there, beyond the garden. Her garden was around 40 meters in length. Behind that was the edge of the moors, which was at least 30 meters past the garden. The dogman was huge. It was down on all fours. Its head was just like what you'd expect to see on a huge wolf. Its fur seemed to be black. I could see it had pointed ears like my American Akita. Its fur looked messy to me. I couldn't see any kind of eye color or what its teeth looked like. It had canine-style back legs, but its arms were more human in appearance. It looked like it had elbows. It kind of looked like a huge wolf, but the sheer size of the head and the fact that its arms looked more human made it look different. At first, it was just sniffing the air as I was watching it. I had a side view of it at the time. It had a snout like that of a wolf, and it was elongated. That's when it stretched like a dog that just woke up from a long nap. After stretching, even though I was indoors about 70 meters away, it looked right at me, like it knew I was at the window. When it looked at me, its eyes looked dark. I didn't see any reflection. That's when it slowly went up onto 2 legs, looking right at me the whole time. It felt like it was looking right at my soul. That's the only way to describe it. Its ears twitched a little, and then it just casually walked away on 2 legs into the woodland. I didn't see a tail as it walked away, and it never looked back. It didn't seem to care that I had seen it. As it moved, it walked kind of like a person with an attitude. It might sound crazy, but it kind of moved its arms like a person, but yet had canine legs. Its shoulders were like a well-built person, but with a huge wolf face. It was muscular like someone who works out and has that perfect toned body. When it had gone into the trees, I went straight into my mom's friend's bedroom. I told them I couldn't sleep. A few weeks after I saw that dogman, my mom's friend's cat went missing. I didn't tell anyone about what I had seen that morning until I was 16. After I met my husband, I eventually told him about it. Because the image of what I saw is still in my head, I won't go out at night. Ever since my encounter, I seem to keep looking for answers for what I saw. That dogman changed my life without a doubt. It's been hard for me to deal with it. My husband and I live out in the country for his sake. We have 5 huge guard dogs and a 6-foot fence around our property. We also have guns just to make me feel safe. My husband's taught me how to defend myself, and we both practice martial arts together. The idea of ever seeing a dogman again still terrifies me. Seeing that dogman really changed how I look at things. Thank you for letting me share this with you. Keep up the good work because your radio station has helped me so much already. It really has. End of quote. Thanks for sharing that encounter with us. I'm glad to hear the show's helped you. That's what it's all about. Our guest tonight is Rebecca L. Purdy. Late one night in 2010, while on a camping trip with her family, she had a terrifying dogman encounter that she's here to talk about tonight. Rebecca, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Would you please give us a brief bio on yourself?
My name is Rebecca Purdy. I am from Michigan. I have a government job that I work through the court system here in Michigan. I am also prior military, and I am married, and I have 6 kids, and we've only got 3 that are still left at home right now. And that's my day job. I also, as a hobby, I am a writer, and I write teen books.
From talking to you in the pre-interview, you made it pretty clear that you're not a stranger to the woods. Please tell us about your experience out there in the woods to help get the point across that you're not the type of person to mistake common wildlife for a dog man.
I've grown up in Michigan. I used to hunt a lot with my dad when I was younger. My husband and I, we do a lot of camping with our kids. We do a lot of hiking, fishing, that sort of thing. We do take camping trips up north every year, and we've lived here pretty much our whole lives, other than we both spent a few years in the military as well. So, I mean, we're used to being out in the woods and know the wildlife that lives in Michigan and that kind of thing. So, I mean, we know there's bears, wolves, coyotes, deer, that kind of thing. So we're really aware of the woods.
I know you want to stay to a certain degree anonymous, but can you give us a vague idea how far you live from where this encounter took place?
Well, we live in the Lower Peninsula in western Michigan, and it's probably a good 5 or 6 hour drive up to the place that we do go camping every year. So it is quite a ways up there, but my husband is originally from the Upper Peninsula, so he is pretty familiar with the area up there.
Now, I know that this encounter, without telling us what actually happened, I know this encounter happened close to a ghost town named Fayette. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, Fayette is actually a historic town up there. It's a lot of ruins that they have over in this town, and you can go over and visit them. And then there's like a long path that will lead you back over to where the actual campsites and stuff are. So the town is separated from the actual campsites themselves. Other than the state park people that come up there to run it during the days, I mean, there's pretty much nothing up there other than ruined buildings and that kind of things where you can actually go through and do tours of the actual town and stuff like that.
As if camping next to a ghost town, or I should say more accurately, close to a ghost town, wasn't bad enough. When you described the way that this forest you were camping in when you had your encounter looked, that paints a really scary picture. Tell us about, since we can't see what that forest looked like, do the best you can to paint a picture for us.
When you're walking up through the woods, I mean, there's a lot of rocky outcroppings. The trees are kind of like knotted and twisted. They like grow almost like out of the rocks, and they're just, they give you this picture of like a dark fairy tale type picture, like just the way some of these trees are shaped and knotted. And there's some areas where you go through them and it gets, you know, pretty dark and dreary kind of setting, but there's like a lot of granite type rock outcroppings that are just coming out everywhere in the woods. And I mean, you really got to watch your step when you're trying to walk through them. But yeah, so they already give you that kind of picture of like almost like a twisted fairy tale, just to, you know, just how these trees are growing out.
Have you ever seen Lord of the Rings?
I have.
So I'm getting the impression it looks like Fangorn Forest.
Yes, I mean, exactly. I mean, maybe not quite as thick in some areas, but it's just the way like those trees are just kind of twisted out and stuff. And there are like little natural walkways almost, or natural stairs that are created by some of these like granite outcroppings too. So it makes it even more almost like the Lord of the Rings, I guess you would say.
Yeah, that paints a pretty creepy picture right there. Doesn't sound all that inviting. Before you actually talk about the details of the encounter, had you ever heard, or have you heard since the encounter took place, about anyone else having any other trouble like what you had at this site of the encounter that you had?
No, prior to that, you know, we didn't know a ton about the dogman to begin with. I mean, my husband and I, you know, we watch like Finding Bigfoot and Ghost Hunters, you know, we think that stuff's kind of interesting, but I mean, we never really, I guess, been believers as you would or had heard much about it. I mean, my husband had, sometimes there's little stories that you might hear, legends that you might hear about some places in northern lower Michigan, but I mean, it wasn't something that I guess we believed in or were really going out researching kind of thing. And after it happened, I know that my husband and I both took to the internet trying to see if there was anybody else who had encounters, because at that point you kind of want that reassurance that you're not crazy and that you're not the only ones who have seen something. So I think after the fact, we really took more to the web just to kind of, see if there were other experiences out there. And I mean, there was nothing like right in that exact area that we came across. I mean, I think there was something that somebody had mentioned, a possible like Bigfoot type thing, but that was like further down, I think, on the Garden Peninsula than where we were.
To address what you just said, you're definitely not crazy, and you're most certainly not the only people to experience something like this. It's hard to believe, but that's how it is. Also, from what you just said, I got the impression that since you did watch Finding Bigfoot, that you were open to the possibility of Bigfoot existing, but you didn't buy into the possibility of dogmen being a reality.
Absolutely. I think it's easier to grasp, like with Bigfoot, because it could, in my mind, just be some undiscovered type ape or something like that, where I think when you think dogman, you're thinking, okay, Hollywood B-movie, werewolves. You're thinking that kind of thing where, I don't know, like, where you're apt to believe it, like vampires and stuff like that. It kind of falls in the realm with that, where it's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, you're more of that mind frame where, like, ghosts and Bigfoot, I think people are a little bit more, easily to latch on to it, even though there's not foolproof, but at least people are getting, like, footprint casts and stuff like that. So it makes it a little bit more believable, and I guess I'd be more, at the time I think I would have been more open to, somebody saying that existed than Dogman.
Well, that wouldn't have made you any more different than most people. It's easier to buy into the whole Bigfoot phenomenon than the Dogman one. I give you that. As far as Dogman versus Bigfoot, I would rather hope that Bigfoot was a reality than Dogman would be when you consider the creep factor. All right, Rebecca, well, please tell us about your encounter. Instead of starting off when you're at the campsite, please tell us about from the moment that you got into the vehicle in the Lower Peninsula where you live, heading up to where you had this encounter. Please start there in your driveway and walk us through step by step what happened to you.
Okay. It was the summer of 2010. We were actually taking a trip up to the Upper Peninsula with our younger 3 kids. We'd been up there quite a bit. Like I said, my husband's originally from the Upper Peninsula, and this was one of those trips where our older kids were now into college, and so we wanted to take our younger 3 up there because our older kids had already experienced pretty much everything up there. So it was just one of those things where we kind of wanted to show them everything that was up there. So my husband likes to leave really, really early in the morning, so it was dark 30 in the morning because he wants to miss all the traffic going up to the bridge. And every year, too, when we go up, we stop at a place called Seashell City, so everybody can kind of get, like, little souvenirs and stuff before we actually get up across the bridge and stuff. So we did that, and then we stayed overnight. That first night, we were just over the bridge I'm trying to think of the name of the park that we stayed at, but it was, I believe, Straits Campground. It's, like, right across from the bridge, and you can actually see the bridge from there. So we started off our trip just staying right there. And then we kind of looped around, like, the whole Upper Peninsula. I mean, we went to, like, the Porcupine Mountains, Oswald's Bear Ranch. Yeah, so, I mean, we went to several different places. We were trying to basically do, like, a different area every night or every 2 nights just so the kids could kind of get an experience of it. I know we took them up to Iron Mountain and let them go into the caves there and the old mines and stuff. You have to ride the old mine cars down and stuff like that. So we just wanted to make it, a really big deal for the kids to kind of experience our home state and just see everything that there was to see here. And so one of our last stops actually on our trip was in Fayette. During the day when we first got there, we set up our tent and our campsite, and then we went over to the historical town, and we walked around there for a little while because we wanted to show the kids, like, all the ruins, and they have, like, the old houses up there from the people that used to work there. So, yeah, so we did a lot of that kind of stuff, and then when we came back to our campsite, we ate dinner, and then we took the kids down. It was starting to get a little bit dark out, but we wanted to take the kids down to Lake Michigan, so, because there's a lot of, like, a rocky beach down there, and there's, like, a lot of areas that you can sit on big rocks and stuff. We wanted to watch the sunset, and then, because we do right now live a little bit closer to the city, we don't get a lot of that, the big open night skies where you can, stare up at the stars and stuff like that. So we did take the kids down, and we did stay down there until it was, like, after dark, and I know we had to come back up through the woods, and my husband and I both had flashlights, and, I mean, you could barely see a couple feet in front of you, even with the flashlights on, and I know it was hard to keep, like, your footing coming up through there. And so we came back and we sat around the campfire for, I don't know, probably a good hour or so, just watching the fire and talking. The kids were kind of playing around and making s'mores. And then after that, we had brought the kids over to the tent, and then at that time, we had a tent. It actually had 2 rooms in it, and so the one room, we had me, my husband, and my daughter. At the time, my daughter was, I believe she was around 9. I think 8 or 9 for this trip. And then we had my 2 sons with us as well, but they were in the attached room on the tent. When we went to bed, we had tried to get the fire out as much as you can, but as anybody who knows who goes camping a lot, you still have, like, those embers in there, and so, it's still kind of glowing a little bit, and, when the wind comes through, it kind of makes your fire restart again as you would. But, so we, at that point, had got everybody into the tents, and, we were laying down. We were probably in there, I would say, probably maybe 45 minutes, an hour, and the first thing we heard was, like, there was, like, this low growl behind our tent, and, like, something had brushed up against the back of our tent, and my daughter was laying right next to me, and she turned to me, and she was just like, "Mom, did you hear that?" I did hear it, and, I was like, okay, do I tell her I heard it? Because, I was kind of scared, and I didn't want to freak her out, but at the same time, it's like I didn't want, her to think that she was the only one that heard it, so, I'm like, yeah, I heard it, and then I turned to my husband, I'm like, did you hear it? And he's like, yeah, but just, just be quiet and just try to go to sleep. And so I'm like, okay, something just growled, I don't know how I'm going to sleep, but I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll try to go to sleep. And then I think it was about 20 minutes after that, like, our fire outside our tent had come back to life, like that, the wind had picked up a little bit, and so, like, our flames were kind of flickering, and you could kind of see them playing off the actual side of the tent. And then, like, this is the part where it's hard to describe, it was like all of a sudden, like, this shadow, like, passed, like, outside our tent, like, over in the area, the side that our fire was on. And so, we're standing at the shadow. It was standing on 2 feet like an actual human was, and it walked up. There's, like, an incline behind our tent. It literally walked up the incline of the tent, and when it got there, it kind of turned a little bit, and, like, you could see the head. It looks like a head of, all I can see is, like, a wolf or a dog. I don't know. I mean, I can't even explain it. It wasn't human. That's all I can say is, the face shape, it looks like the snout of a dog, and it just kind of traipsed as you would, like, up that incline. And my first thought, was, I was like, oh my gosh, what the heck is that? And my daughter, like, grabbed my shoulder, and she jerked me back, and she's like, "Mom, did you see that? Did you see that?" And I was like, my first thought was, okay, maybe my husband's messing with me, and I don't know, how I could even think that, because looking back, my husband is seriously laying right next to me, but I remember just, like, whipping around, and I was like, knock it off. I'm like, just quit messing around. And my husband's laying there with his arms behind his head, propping his head up almost like he was, like, with a pillow or something, and he's like, I'm laying right here, and I was like, did you see that? Did you see that? He's like, yes, I saw that. I don't know what the hell it was. And he's like, just be quiet. Just be quiet. And so at that point, we're laying there, and it walked just, like, right to our campsite, and, then it was gone. And, in your head, you're trying to come up with, like, every logical explanation for it. We've lived in Michigan our whole lives. We've been out in the woods a lot. We know what coyotes or wolves look like. And I would have defaulted to, yeah, it was probably just a coyote, because I know they have, a lot of them up there. But there's just this fact that it was walking on 2 legs. Dogs and wolves, coyotes, they walk on 4 legs. And, and then you start thinking, maybe this was somebody in a mask. But if you've been in the woods in the Upper Peninsula, I mean, you know how dark it is. I mean, you cannot maneuver these woods without a flashlight. And whatever this was did not have a flashlight. And I don't see why somebody would go out in the woods in a mask in the middle of the night. I mean, they wouldn't be able to see to walk. I don't know. I mean, to this day, like I said, we've gone back up to the same campsite every year since then, and we've never had another encounter. We've never heard anything else like this. I mean, we've even went as far as buying trap cameras because we wanted to, it's like as scared as we were that night and not being able to sleep and going out and looking for footprints or just anything to say, oh, look, there really was something here. I mean, we went out to buy these trap cameras in hopes that, not that we want to have another encounter, but if we did, we want answers to know what it was out there. And so that's kind of been our drive, I think, why we go back up there every year is because it's like you want validation that there was something there, that you're not crazy. And, I mean, I know what we saw. I can't explain it. And, I mean, we've been on, like, websites after the fact trying to figure out, has anybody else had experiences up in this area? And so it's just one of those things where, I mean, I think I want to know, what it was. I mean, looking back, I mean, the only explanation or anything that even came close to the description of what we saw through that tent was the dog man. And, I mean, for a while, like, you don't want to tell people it, but then I did do a blog post, like I said earlier in our pre-interview, and it was more as just to kind of have some validation to see if, like, anybody else had experiences. So I thought, if I post something, maybe somebody else will come back and say, hey, look, I had an experience too. But it's like at the same time, it's like you don't want people to think you're crazy, but you know what you saw.
You mentioned that the dog man walked up the slope towards your tent, Rebecca. I'm getting the impression that when it did that, it was close enough to touch the wall. It was
pretty close. I don't know, like, feet-wise, because my daughter was on one side of me and my husband was on the other. So, I mean, but it was close enough to cast a decent-sized shadow. So, I mean, I know the first time when we first heard it behind the tent, it did brush. I mean, you could hear it, like, brush right up against the side of the tent. And then the second time when it came around, it was a few feet further out from the tent.
If it was that close to the tent and it was backlit by that campfire, I take it you had a good chance to take a look at its legs as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, there was no clothing. That's why, like, your first thought is it's human, but then when you see that there's not a human face there, it's not built quite like because nobody's going to walk around naked in the middle of the night, or at least most people I know aren't going to do that. So it didn't make sense to me.
When you looked at its legs and you mentioned the whole man-looking thing, I take it its legs looked more man-like and not like a canine with that backwards knee look.
Well, it had a little bit of like a slouch to it, but I mean, like I said, with the shadow play, I mean, you're trying to get, but my focus was mainly on its head because it was so just beyond belief, I guess. I mean, so my main focus, like I said, was on the head and just the fact that it kind of like slunk, I guess is the word you would use, like up that hill, just the way it came up. It wasn't like bent all the way over. It was on two legs. And like I said, but my main focus was mainly on the head just because of the snout on it.
There's just something so creepy about that idea, that mental image. I'm just sitting here thinking about what it must have been like and what must have been going through your mind when you saw that shadow on your tent wall. I can't even imagine. I know there've got to be some Hollywood producers taking notes right now, getting ideas about making some kind of a movie on this, because that's just straight out of a nightmare.
Well, and it's one of those things, too, where, like, you're terrified, like, you don't want to move. I mean, you don't want to make a noise, but, I just remember turning to my husband because I'm like, obviously, he's the man, and you're like, okay, think protector, and you're, like, turning, like, okay, what's going on? And you're kind of hoping, okay, maybe it's not really there, and I'm just seeing things. But, when you have three people all seeing the same thing, and we're all freaking out about the same thing, and normally my husband's a pretty, brave guy. I mean, he's prior military as well, and normally he's the one, if we're going out in the woods, he'll be the one to have, make sure we have a gun or a knife or something with us. in that particular night, I mean, we didn't have anything in the tent, because looking back now, he's even said, you know, I almost wish we would have unzipped that, just the window, just so we could look out. He goes, but I didn't dare, not knowing what it was and not having any way to defend yourself if it happened to, like, not like you looking at it, you know what I mean? So you, in hindsight, you think of, okay, maybe we should have did this different or this different, but at the time, it's like you're so shocked and scared that, I mean, the only thing running through your mind is, oh my gosh, I hope this thing leaves, don't come in the tent. I mean, those are your two thoughts right there.
Oh, I'm so glad it didn't. I'm also glad that you did not make the mistake of opening up that window and looking out. You've got three different tiers of dogman eyewitnesses. You've got those that get the impression a dogman was around but didn't see it. You've got the people that fall into the category where they got a glimpse of one but not a very good one. And then you've got the category of people that got a good close-up and personal look. And you don't want to be in that last category. The problems just start right there at that point. Now, from what you've said, I get the impression that you didn't pack up and leave out of there as soon as the threat seemed to be gone. You, the way you've been talking, I get the impression you did all spend the night.
Yeah, we ended up staying out because we'd already paid for the site, and at that time, you know, I mean, when you have 6 kids, you don't throw away extra money like if you've paid for something, you know, which looking back, I know none of us really didn't sleep that night. My 2 boys were oblivious to the whole thing. I mean, they slept through the whole thing, and so the next day, as we're talking about, because we just kept rehashing the story like the whole rest of the way home that day. I mean, we just kept talking about it because it's like trying to make sense of everything after it happens, but like that whole night though, it's like we didn't sleep. It's like you're scared, but then you're also scared, okay, if we go to pack up, is it still going to be waiting out there? So it's like you have all these things like rolling through your head, okay, so why wouldn't you run out of there? But then when you have to tear a tent down, you got 3 kids you got to pack in, you know, is it going to make more sense to just be quiet and hope it stays away, or, you know, get out there and, you know, make yourself known to it? So it's kind of one of those things where we chose the latter and just stayed put.
Well, that might have been the best course of action. Maybe it was still around, and if you would have gone out and tried to break down things to pack up, maybe problems would have started. But the next morning, when you unzipped the tent to go outside, tell us about what you saw. I know you looked around after you went out.
The first thing actually me and my husband did do is we walked around like our entire campsite. I mean, we walked in the area where we were pretty sure it looked like from the shadow where it had come up at. I mean, we were looking for like footprints, claw marks. I mean, just anything to give us, I guess, some type of idea that it was actually there. I mean, we went behind our tent where the thing had brushed up against our tent. I mean, we've scoured like everything right behind our site because we were like, okay, there's got to be some proof that this was really here. That, I mean, even after all 3 of us saw it, it's like it's still unreal almost, or unbelievable, because you just don't expect stuff like that to happen. And so, like I said, you know, we really did scour the whole campsite. I mean, just looking for anything. And, I mean, we didn't find any evidence at all that there had been anything there.
Considering what you saw, heard, you name it, that night, and also considering what you saw, heard, you name it, the next morning when you went out and were looking around for evidence, did you ever get the impression that maybe that one dogman wasn't alone?
And that's where kind of like, I'm not sure. It's just one of those things where, because like I said, the first thing we heard was right behind the tent with the low growl and brushing against it. And then the next thing was like a little bit further over, coming from a little bit different angle. So I don't know if there could have been more than one or if it was just the one. So it's like you're looking at all those things because, you know, normally obviously I know with like wolves and coyotes, they usually will go with a pack or, you know, running around and stuff like that. But yeah, we looked around for everything. I mean, just any indication that there was just something there. And, you know, looking back, I don't know if it could have been more than one because, like I said, there was 2 different placements of where we heard or saw it. So it very well could have been more than one. Just like I said, you know, with the one thing behind the tent and the next one next to the tent. So I don't know if it was the same thing or different.
Before you saw that scary shadow of the dogman on that tent wall, were there any precursors to give you a clue that something might not be right? Any strange smells, any strange sounds, anything like that?
Not really. I mean, everything I think was, pretty calm. I mean, everybody was kind of settling in for the night. I mean, it was during the actual week itself, so the campground's not as busy during the actual week. So there's a lot of older people that stay up there and like campers and stuff like that, but there's also like a lot of people with younger kids that stay up. But it was actually during the week itself, so there wasn't like a ton of people up there, and so everything just seemed normal and quiet. I mean, there wasn't like anything out of the ordinary that would have caught me off guard, like, I think something's going to happen kind of thing. So yeah, it was just normal.
Now, in the pre-interview, Rebecca, you mentioned that you did hear a strange type of sound in the woods. I'm not clear on when exactly you heard this strange sound, but I think you know what I'm getting at. Could you tell us about that?
Okay, yeah. The only other weird thing that had happened that night was at one point it sounded like it was like after, kind of, I guess, like before and then a little bit after the whole episode was like almost like a faint drum type sound. I don't know how to explain it, almost like a battle drum type sound in the woods. I don't know where it came from, and like I said, we have gone up there every year since this has happened, and we've never like heard any of these same sounds. We've never had any other experiences. I can't explain the drum sounds. I wanted to write it off as buoys, but the buoys are pretty far away, and they make more of a clingy ding type sound. It's not like, I know what drums sound like, so it was more of like a drumming, like heavy drum sound.
Strange. That's very strange. Did you say that you had or had not been camping there before?
The year that this happened was actually our first family vacation of camping at this actual campsite. So that was our first year we ever stayed there. And then every year after that, we've returned back to Fayette. There's like something about the place. I mean, we really like the campgrounds themselves, but it's also too, I think we still kind of want just a validation of what we saw up there. And like I said, after all this had happened, the next summer, my husband had purchased trap cameras, and we put them out every year behind our campsite, we always pick a campsite against the woods because it's like we want to know what we saw up there, and we have not had any other encounters. We have not seen anything else the same. We've not heard anything else like we did that night. And it's almost like now that you're actually prepared that something could happen, it won't happen, but when you're like least expecting it is when it happens. It's just the strangest thing.
That is pretty strange. The way you talk about this place where you camped, I'm kind of on the fence here. Is that an established campsite, or is it just a place for the most part where you pitched your tent in the woods?
It is an established campsite. They do have like marked out campsites. They have some that are like backed right against the woods because there's some paths in the woods that'll go right down to like, they have like two different beaches, but the one beach is pretty much like all that granite type rock and woodsy. And then other parts of it are a little less nature-y, if you want to say that. But, so it is an established one. It doesn't have a ton of sites, though. It's not like a huge campground where you've got thousands of people or anything like that. It's a relatively small campground itself, and they don't have showers or anything like that up there. It's the outhouse type toilets and stuff like that. So you can hook your camper up to like just the water and electric, but you don't have like dump stations or anything like that up there. It's more of a rustic type setting.
I see. Well, not including family members, who was the first person you or whoever else in the family told about that encounter?
Okay, let's see. You mean who else we would have told about it?
That's right. I know you talked about it at length in the vehicle coming home, but after you left that campsite, who was the first person that any of you told about that encounter, and what was their reaction to it?
I think probably the first person I told was probably my sister, just because I'm really close with her. She was just kind of blown away by it, and then I told a couple of my coworkers just because I'm really good friends with them, and then I told like just a couple people in my writers group about it. But, it was just one of those things where, like, I definitely wasn't telling everybody about it yet. Not until the point where after me and my husband did a bunch of research trying to figure out, okay, what could this have been? Has anybody else seen anything even semi-close to what we've seen up in this area. Then at that point is when I did go on my blog and mention it. It was one of those things where it's like you don't want to sound crazy, but you want validation. You want somebody else to say, yeah, I've had an encounter, or I've experienced something similar to that. Because it's like, on the one hand, you don't want to sound crazy, and you don't want people, pointing fingers like, oh my gosh, that's really weird. But then on the second hand, you're looking at it and you're thinking, I want to share this experience with other people, because what if somebody else had an experience, or what if somebody else is going through the same thing of, should I share this story? Should I not share this story? Are people going to think I'm crazy? So I think, I was looking at it more from that perspective, where my husband, I think, has been a lot more closed mouth about it, because he doesn't want people to think he's crazy. He did reach out to one person who I believe, I can't even remember her name now, who does some types of researches and stories on them, and he had talked to her briefly. I think he just had more questions of, do you know if anybody else has had any sightings up in this particular area? Because I think she makes it her business kind of to study up on these kind of things. And so he kind of reached out to her just as okay, I don't want to share this with everybody, but I'd like to know, has anybody else had these experiences?
The responses that you got are pretty common for people that see these things. That's what really tugs at your heartstrings, the idea that someone like you could have such a horrible experience, see something that's so terrifying. It affects people in different ways. Some people see these things and handle the trauma a lot better than others. I'm getting the impression that you handled your encounter a lot better than most, in fact. I think you did say that you do continue to go back there to camp from time to time.
Yeah, we do. And like I said, I think a lot of it, we really do like the Upper Peninsula, the beauty of like the woods, and just, you can go miles without seeing a house. We like that kind of life. Then again, like I said, on the other hand, it's almost like, it's not like you're trying to invite trouble in, but it's like you want to just have that validation of, okay, I just need to know what I saw. And if I see it again, maybe that will make it more real. Not that I want to be outside with it, but like if we would just have like, a picture or something just to show that, okay, yes, this is what we saw that night. Obviously we didn't get out of the tent. We're brave, but not that brave. So, we didn't obviously hop out of the tent or anything. So, I'm glad we didn't, because I don't know if seeing it, on the other hand, is that going to, make me have nightmares? Am I going to be scared to go out in the woods anymore? But then, you want just like a picture or something just to show that, okay, yes, we really did see something up here, but I don't want the actual physical contact of going out there to see it.
Oh, I don't blame you there. I was going to ask you, that touches on one of the questions I had for you. Do you or don't you want to have their existence proven? But it sounds like you already answered the question.
Yeah, I just want to know what we saw, and I think a lot of times people are kind of scared of the unknown, and they don't want to know, but on the other hand, it's like, I think it's kind of conceited as a race if we think that there's not the possibility of other things out there. Not to say that I believe like every paranormal thing is real, but when you have, something happen, you want that validation. It's like, yeah, in your heart what you saw, but to be able to freely talk about it with people and say, yeah, look, see, it is real, and look, this experience proves, that something's there. I don't know for sure, but I just know that nothing else fit the description of what we saw. And if you would have asked me a couple years prior to even having that encounter, do you believe in dogmen? I would have said, heck no. And I would have said, no, that's B-movie stuff, that's, Hollywood. Actually, it happens when you start looking into stuff, and then you realize, okay, some of these people have been talking about this for like centuries, legends and stuff, and then you're like, okay, these had to have stemmed from somewhere.
Let me ask you about the lingering effects, Rebecca. What kind of PTSD or nightmare issues, if any, have you experienced as a result of that encounter?
I think the biggest thing for me is like, it really is when we go back out camping again, is usually those first couple of nights up there, like you have a really, really, really hard time sleeping because you know what you've heard or seen before. So I think I spend a lot more time awake on our camping trips. And I don't sleep as well during our camping trips. I'm constantly, like every little noise, you try to over-examine it. You try to, you're wondering, okay, what was that? What was that? And, or even in the mornings when you have to go out and start your vehicle to, and it's still dark out because I have a long commute to my day job. And so it's usually dark when I leave. So I think I'm a little more paranoid with being alone in the dark kind of thing, or if we're near woods and stuff like that, I'm a lot more paranoid about stuff like that than I probably would have been prior to this happening. So I think my biggest thing is just especially like I said, when we're camping, I really, really have a hard time sleeping just because like every little noise, you're wondering if, okay, is this going to happen again kind of thing.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask you about how this encounter might or might not have followed you home. A lot of people think that a dogman encounter ends the moment that the dogman is out of sight. But it sure seems like dogman encounters last a lifetime.
Well, and I think, too, is like once, like you said, once you have that experience, it stays with you. I mean, it's not something you're going to forget. I mean, I can remember, you know, just like every detail of that like whole night, like that camping trip, like if of Fayette, you know, being up there and staying there. It's one of those things where like you replay it in your head, you know, not just the, oh, is it real, but the, you know, that fear that you had when you did see it coming up, and then the wondering, okay, would this ever happen again, or, you know, could this happen again? And I mean, so you do replay those things over and over, and I think it's hard for people who haven't had an experience to understand that when you have something like this happen, I mean, you want, like again, you know, back to the validation, it's like you want that validation, and you can't let it go because it's like it almost becomes like an obsession, because it's like you're trying to research, you're trying to, you know, make sense of what happened to you.
Along the lines of what you just said, there really is no way for anyone that hasn't seen a dog man, hasn't experienced what it's like to have one just feet away or in your presence. There's no way for someone that hasn't been through that to understand what you, Rebecca, or other dogman eyewitnesses have been through and go through back on that whole it's not over the moment the dogman leaves your presence thing. If you haven't been through it, you'll never know what it's like. And that's got to be a huge source of frustration for you.
I think it is, because it's like you want to kind of talk about it, but yet you feel weird because majority, you know, 95% of the people, 99% of the people around you have no idea what you're talking about, and they think it's fake. And, you know, I do have, you know, a couple of people that are like, I mean, who know me, obviously, they know I'm not the type of person that's going to, I mean, I do write and stuff, but I'm not going to make something like this up. I mean, there's just, I mean, no point in it, especially, you know, I have a government job. I mean, it would look foolish, you know, I'm like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, for me to make something like this up, it just, you know, I think that's the hardest part, is you want people to believe you. You want people to know that fear that you went through, or to know that you really did see something. And I mean, you're going to always have your believers, you're going to always have your skeptics. And, you know, I was a skeptic, you know, before this. I mean, if, like, again, you know, if you would have told me before this happened that the dogman was real, I would have said, no, that's bull. I don't believe it. It's a made up story, you know, to scare kids. But, you know, after you have it, it does change you. I mean, you're looking at everything a lot different. I mean, when you walk into the woods, you're paying a lot closer attention to what's around you, that's for sure.
Oh, sure, that only makes sense. You know, there are a lot of bad things. It goes without saying, there are a lot of bad things that come along with having an encounter with a dog man, but it being so hard to find someone else to relate what you went through, to relate what you're going through as a result of that encounter, the fact that it's so hard to find someone like that that's been through it too, to relate to, that's got to be one of the worst things about this. I feel for you. I really do. What is the worst thing about having had this encounter?
I think it's just that it brings more of that fear. Like, I mean, 'cause like I said, you know, I love going hiking and camping and stuff. I think it just, like, again, brings more of that fear to the forefront of, you know, what could actually be in the woods. I think it gets you to that point. I mean, I'm at least lucky in the part where, you know, my husband and daughter, you know, had the experience with me. So, I mean, in that aspect, I at least have some people to talk to it about. But again, you know, I think the biggest fear for, you know, at least me, is just, you know, sometimes wondering or being a little bit more fearful of going into the woods, and, you know, those first couple nights on the camping trip of, you know, reliving the, okay, this happened a few years ago when we were here, is it going to happen again? So I think that's probably like the biggest thing I would have to say.
Well, that makes sense. You are an author, Rebecca. Please talk about your favorite books that you've written so that the listeners can go out there and buy these great books.
Okay, yeah, actually I write for young adults and teens. I love like fantasy type stuff, so I do write a lot of like fantasy paranormal type books, but my most recent release, which I'm really proud of, it actually takes place in Michigan. It's a book I wrote as a teen, actually, but I wrote it as a short story, and then it got published this last year, and I've had pretty good success with it, but it's entitled The Winter People, and it's about a girl named Salome, and she falls through the ice as a child, but she's actually lured out on the ice by this voice in the woods, and after she falls through it, she's rescued by some beings, and these beings kind of bring her to safety, but they warn her to stay out of the woods and away from this pond, or bad things will happen. And so she gets this fear of winter, and I mean, it's to the point where she can't be out in winter, and she's just petrified of it. And she basically stays away from these woods, and then when she's a teen, she ends up being forced back into the woods, and now she's trying to deal with trying to figure out what's actually out in the woods, and, you know, trying to prove that she's not crazy, that cause she does still hear voices out in the woods that nobody else can hear. So it's just about her journey of trying to figure out what's actually out there and whether or not she should trust the people that are around her, because she's got some new people around her that have just kind of started showing up, and it all kind of stems back to the fact of what had happened to her when she was younger and the people that are out there. So yeah, it's a fun book, and I really like writing and stuff like that, making stories up. But yeah, fantasy stuff is probably my crutch. So
it sounds like a good read. I know that you've got a blog. Will listeners be able to not only read your blog, but get access, be able to buy your books from visiting your blog?
Yeah, we have all my links are run along the side of my blog with all my books. Like I said, I do write the fantasy stuff, the paranormal stuff. I do have some just regular romance stuff out there too. But yeah, I just like the fantasy stuff though. So.
Oh, I don't blame you. That's my favorite genre to read. Please tell us how to find your blog.
Google my name at Rebecca L. Purdy. Usually it'll pop my blog right up for you. And then I'm also on Facebook and on Twitter. So I'm pretty much all over social media.
Do you have any comments, closing points you'd like to share with us?
I think my big thing is just that I know there are a lot of non-believers out there, and, you know, I know until you have something happen to you that it is really hard to fathom, and, you know, I would just hope that they would at least listen to people who have had these experiences and, you know, and just not write them off as crazy to begin with, and people that have had the experiences. I know it's hard to come forward with them, but I think it's kind of a benefit too, because at the same time you can, you know, kind of reach out to other people who've also had similar experiences, which, you know, that's my main reason for agreeing to the interview today, is just, you know, I want to share my story. I want other people to know that they're not alone, and that, I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. I mean, anybody can have an experience.
Very well said, Rebecca. Very well said. I can't thank you enough for agreeing to come on the show tonight and share your story. Thanks again so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I really do appreciate it. Don't be a stranger, okay?
All right, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Have a great night.
Yep, you too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Before I bring on tonight's guest, I've got another encounter I want to read for you that came in. The encounter reads, and I quote, "Hi, Vic. I had an encounter back in the late 1990s. I'm currently 21 and am from Lecter County, Kentucky. I currently live in Montgomery County, Kentucky, though. Where I live now is all farmland with no wooded areas, but back home it's heavily forested. Where I currently live, it's also much more populated. Before my encounter, basically I knew nothing of these types of creatures. I'd only seen one of the old Howling films on VHS from a video rental store, thanks to my sister, whom is much older than me. I haven't told many people about what happened. I've only told some of my family, my close friends, and my girlfriend, whom I've been with for 4 years now. The only people that ended up believing me or paying any attention to me was my grandmother, who I was staying with at the time of the encounter, my Uncle David, which was my grandmother's brother, and my girlfriend. My mother and I moved to Montgomery County in 1999. My granny still lived back home, though, so I would go visit her almost every weekend because I was so used to seeing her, and her rules were much less strict than my mother's were. I was able to stay up all night if I wanted. Sci-fi and horror movies could be watched there, too. My granny lived down a long gravel road back in a holler in an old blue mobile home. Her trailer was located about 100 yards from an abandoned mine. My Uncle David lived about 5 miles away up on the side of a mountain just above my granny's church. At the time, I was obsessed with toy guns and playing war. I often built forts in the woods and acted like I was in the movie Predator. Xenomorphs and the Predator were the scariest things I knew of until my encounter. I knew they only existed in movies, though. My Uncle Michael lives in Knoxville, Tennessee, and would often bring my cousin Joshua up so he could hang out with me. Josh and I were closer than brothers. My granny would take us into the woods a lot, where we would play war, go on long hikes, and play by the old mine. Sometimes we would hear weird noises coming from the mine, but my granny would just assure us that it was just the empty echoes of the mine playing tricks on us. Being kids, we listened to her. She was probably right, but there was just something about being underground in total darkness that freaked me out. It still makes me uneasy to this day. David would come spend time with us a lot, too. He was at my granny's house a lot. He would cut her grass, take care of her old car, and help with anything else she wasn't able to do for herself. He would always tell me never to go into or around the woods alone. It could have just been him making sure nothing happened to me, but it was the way he'd say it, all serious-like, that made me nervous. It was like he knew something I didn't. I guess I'll get on with my encounter now. It was a Friday night. My granny and I had just gotten back from Jackson, Kentucky, where she met my mother and me to pick me up. It was around 8 p.m. when we got back to my granny's house. On the way back, we stopped at Magic Mart, where my granny bought me a new toy M16, which I was very excited about. After we got back to her house, I took my bath while she made dinner. After my bath, we both ate and she got ready for bed. She wanted to be well rested because she had something to do with some of her church people the next morning. As usual, David was coming over to watch me while she was gone. So when Granny would go to bed, I would stay up very late into the a.m. watching movies and playing with my toy guns. I remember getting scared of something I had seen on the movie I was watching. Because of that, I went to make sure the doors were locked. The front one was locked as usual since it was never used. The back door was unlocked though, so I deadbolted it and turned the knob lock. The living room was located on the opposite side of the trailer from my granny's bedroom, and there was a big window in her hallway just before the back door, which was just out and to the left of Granny's bedroom. After staying up so late, I was starting to get tired. I think it was around 3 a.m. when I decided to turn in. It was my least favorite time of the night because I would have to turn the TV and all the lights off. Then I'd have to walk down the hallway by that window to go to bed. As I was walking down the hallway, I was almost to the back door when I heard a loud thump near or on the door. The door had a spring hinge on it that would pull it closed when it was opened. That spring on the door was swinging back and forth from the thump. I stopped dead in my tracks and got down on the floor. I could hear something breathing very heavily. Whatever it was sounded out of breath, like it had been running a long distance. I stayed on the floor for what felt like forever. What happened next still gives me chill bumps to this day. I heard her old wooden steps creak, and then the doorknob started turning back and forth furiously. Something was trying to open the door. I didn't waste any time getting up. I ran to my granny's room, slung the door open, and started yelling, screaming, and crying. She rose up fast and took me into her arms. I told her what had happened, and she called David right away. He said he would be there in a few minutes. My granny asked me to walk into the hallway with her to look out the window to see if there was a car out there or see who it was. My granny's trailer had a light mounted on the side of it since there were no street lights. It would only light up the area very dimly. We walked to the back door and the knob was no longer being turned. Then we walked over to the window, and that's when I saw it. It was at the end of the driveway with its back to us. It was about 7 feet tall, covered in pitch black hair and walking slowly away. I screamed in fear, and right then it turned its head halfway around. I couldn't see facial features, but I could tell by its outline that it had a snout. My granny grabbed me and asked me what was wrong. I kept saying, "There's a monster, there's a monster. Didn't you see it?" She took us both back to her bedroom, where we waited until David got there. It felt like it took forever. He finally got there and said he'd stay the night. After finally calming down, I fell asleep. My granny ended up staying home the next day. I don't know that anything else happened that night, but I do remember David complaining about not being able to go back to sleep. That was the last weekend I went to my granny's house. About 6 months later, she ended up moving to Knoxville, Tennessee with my Uncle Michael due to her financial problems. Part of the reason I don't share this a lot is because I don't want to be called crazy or a liar. I've researched sightings in that area, but was only able to turn up a few Sasquatch sightings. I know that I saw something, and to this day I've got a phobia of windows at night. I have to have blinds or covers of some sort on my windows. I'd say that I'd seen a Sasquatch, but I did notice the snout, so that makes me think Dogman. What scares me the most is that it was trying to get in, which indicates it was up to no good. Thanks for reading my encounter and all of your hard work on the show. Keep up the great work. Daniel Depew. End of quote. Daniel, I don't think you're crazy, and I don't think you're a liar. I think you saw what you thought you saw. Thanks so much for sharing your encounter, buddy. I really appreciate it. Our guest tonight is Corrine Mandira. Corrine, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Hello, Vic. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Well, thanks for being here. Glad to have you. Corrine, if you don't mind, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
My name is Corrine Mandira. I'm a licensed therapeutic massage therapist. I have certifications in cancer massage, myofascial release, an advanced form of it, many other certifications, including lymphatic drainage, proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, deep tissue, trigger therapy, neuromuscular therapy, a lot of different certifications. I work on a diverse range of clients and patients, and I've been doing this for a number of years. I have logged over 10,500 documented hours of massages performed, and later this year I will be going into teaching. I'll become an instructor. I've lived in England also for a brief time, for just a couple of years. My mother was actually British. She was from Liverpool, England, born and raised there. So I've lived around this country. I've lived in England, and I really love being near woods. And in my adult life, I try to be as close to woods as I can. I had a dog that was my companion dog for many, many years, for almost 12 years, and we used to range out into state park and state natural areas, and we'd go out and spend an entire day roaming around. I've always loved nature and have always been an observer of what's natural, the animals and the plants, and more so animals, because I love animals. So I pay a lot of attention to them. I fed them. I've watched them, watched their antics. They all have personalities. I read a lot. I'm a very big reader, and I love science, so I'm always reading about animals and science and medicine and technology, things like that. So I try to be as educated as I can about the outdoors. My friends think I'm just this repository of knowledge about animals because I love them and I've watched them so much. It was not unusual for my dog, Sirius, and I to go out in the morning, pack a little bag and go out in the morning and just go all day long, just walk around and just hike around and see things in places where there were not even trails. So I've done this for years. Anytime I can, I live close to woods, close to a state park, close to an area where I can observe animals and see what's around me. I'm very much in tune with nature.
To start things off, as far as the Dogman topic goes here, Corrine, your grandfather apparently had a Dogman encounter that's actually one of the first things that we talked about when I met you online. If you don't mind, please tell us all about that, everything that you know about what seemingly happened to him, even though I know he didn't share all that much in the way of information about that encounter.
It was probably what he didn't tell us that made it such an interesting thing to me, because all my life I've been interested in. Years ago we called it werewolves. Now we know most of us are referring to these beings as dogmen. But from a child, I remember he was very strange around everything that pertained to werewolves, and had an incident that happened to him in his native Sicily. We were told that he had an experience with a werewolf in Sicily. And of course, my brother and I, over the years, we'd say, "Oh, come on, Grandpa, please tell us. We won't laugh. Please tell us." And he would say, "No, I don't want to talk about it." He would get very upset, and my grandmother would yell at us and chase us away. I remember being a little girl, and my parents and I had gone, and I think it was around this time of year, because my father's birthday was February 5th, yesterday. And we had gone to their house in Chicago, to their apartment, and we were taking them to dinner. We were going to dinner at Luigi's in Chicago. This was this old restaurant that was a wonderful Italian place. So we picked them up from the apartment, and we were walking down the street. And this had to be, oh my gosh, it had to be late 50s, no later than 1960. 1966 in my mind. I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was in that kind of a time frame. It was evening, it was dark, and we were walking down the street to the car. And as we were walking past a house, a dog howled, very mournful, long howl. And my grandfather just froze. He was just paralyzed. He couldn't move. He looked absolutely terror-stricken. And I could see, because it was cold, I could see his breath in the air, that he was like panting, like he was absolutely terrified. I was just a child, but children pick up on things like that. They pick up on whether something is wrong or not, or something is not right. And I did, and I was just looking at him because I'd never seen him like this. This was really unusual. And my father went up next to him and got him by the arm and said, he used to call him Sir Pete. His name was Peter for Pietro. And he'd say, "Sir Pete, I'm right here. I've got you. It's just a dog. He's probably lonely." And my mother, in her lovely British accent, went on to the other side and she said, "No, it's okay, Daddy. We've got you. Nothing to be afraid of. It's just a lonely doggy. The car is right there. See?" And they had to take him by the arms and walk him, literally move him to the car, which wasn't that far. It was right there on the street. But he was incapable of moving, and they had to literally move him to the car. Got into the car. My grandmother was behind him. She had her hand on his back, saying, "It's okay, it's okay." We got into the car, and I'm like, glued to what's going on. I can't believe this is so strange. And I looked at my grandfather, and he was like breathing in deep, gasping breaths and tears on his face. And my grandmother gave him a handkerchief, and he was so upset, so terribly upset, just from hearing a dog howl. And I thought that was the most unusual thing, and that really stuck with me. And there were times, like, for instance, even years after that, my brother and I would be watching a show called Creature Features. I think it was on Friday nights. It was just horror stories. A lot of them were old movies, but we loved it. We ate that stuff up. And we were watching The Wolfman, and we had been waiting for this movie to come on because we loved it. It was the old Lon Chaney, the Wolfman. Well, my grandparents were coming, and my father ran over to us and said, "Shut that off. You cannot watch that here. Grandpa's coming. You need to turn the channel, change the channel." So we had to change it. We were upset because we'd been waiting to watch this show. We couldn't have anything pertaining to werewolf on TV if he was coming over. And I tried later on asking my father, "What did he experience? Did he ever tell you?" And my father said, "No, he will never talk about it. He won't tell Grandma. He won't tell me." And when we would ask him, he would say, "Stop. I don't want to talk about this. I know they exist because I saw it myself. And I don't want to talk about it. I want to try to forget it. I want my whole life to just forget it." And he wouldn't speak of it. He was from Marsala, Sicily. It's on the coast. At that time, of course, many, many years ago, it was a lot less urban there was I'm sure a lot less city and much more countryside. And I know my father had told me it had happened out in the countryside. So this wasn't something that was in the city. It was out in the countryside where they had lived. They had a small vineyard and they grew things. They were not rich at all. But I do know this, that after this happened, after this incident supposedly happened, my grandfather emigrated to this country and joined the army and went to war. He fought in World War I. He lied about his age and joined the army and got as far away from it as he could. So that was really something that stuck with us. Now, years later, my father died, and my mother died after my grandfather had died, my father, then my mother. And when I was going through everything in the house, cleaning through everything and renovating and trying to sort things out, I found a pistol that was my grandfather's that he had given to my father. And it was just a small little gun, and it was very beautiful. It looked like it was engraved or embossed. I don't know much about guns, but it was a beautiful little gun. And I remember there were 5 bullets. So I had a silver polishing cloth, and I was sitting there looking at this gun. It was not loaded, and I was picking up the bullets and looking at them, and 3 of them looked different than the other 2, and I was polishing them with the cloth. I polished 1 bullet, and it really didn't do that much. And then I picked up the second bullet and rubbed it with the cloth, and it shined up a lot more. And I proceeded to just keep polishing it, and I realized 2 of these bullets were silver. And I thought, oh my gosh, this man was so terrified his whole life, died in his 70s, and was so terrified of this that he actually had a couple of silver bullets, which in his mind may have been just folklore, but he was trying to do whatever he could. He was so terrified, even in this country, it stuck with him that hard that he would do such a thing. We never knew about this. We never spoke about it. I don't know if my father was aware of it or if he just never said anything, but it just struck me so long after the fact that here was this gun with 2 silver bullets. Whether it would have worked or not wasn't the point. It was that he was so frightened his whole life that he would have such a thing. So that launched me on my whole path of being interested in dogmen, werewolves, and over the years I've come to think these are not the Hollywood versions of people that turn into animals. They're something else. And I just spend a lot of time reading and listening to interviews and trying to find out more about them because I've been so interested my whole life.
Doing the math, it sounds like for over 50 years he was haunted by this encounter that he had.
He was. It never left him. He was always afraid of it. And I understand now because I do have certifications that enable me to work with people with PTSD, depression, anxiety disorders, and bipolar, ADHD, different disorders like that. And over the years, I understand he had something very similar to a form of PTSD, that incident. So whatever it was pretty horrifying to him as a teenager.
Oh, it must have been. When people encounter these things, it's only natural that an encounter is going to affect any given person in a different way. But it sure sounds like it really hit him hard. I feel so bad. The fact that he had to live through that fear for over 50 years is just absolutely horrible. You have a lot of information to talk about here tonight, Corrine. I want to move forward on to the next topic that I wanted to talk about, which would be there is a female dog breeder that was in, I believe you said, West Virginia that had an incident one night. Could you talk about that?
Yes, I know about this because my late husband was from West Virginia, from Matoka, West Virginia. He and his family lived up in the hills. They called it Matoka Mountain, but it was just a higher elevation up in the hills. And there were homes up in this very rugged territory that were just terraced into these higher elevations. These were not rich people. These were very simple people that lived very simple lives. They were not high tech. They just wanted to be out in this beautiful country. And that's what mattered to them, living in this beautiful, beautiful setting. So we were married because he was a soldier. He had just finished combat training. This was July of 1967. He was being shipped out to Vietnam. So we had a month leave, and we got married in Virginia, and we were in West, both very young. I was in my teens. I was very young. And we were at his parents' house for over a month. While we were there, it was an awakening to me because I was raised in Chicago. I had never seen anything like this. This was rural Appalachia. There were some really strange things that would happen in the woods there, and I'm sure any place like that in the country, they have stories. You know, people that live in mountains, they're close to nature, they see a lot of things. Something had happened that, they were telling me stories about things that happened on the mountain, and there was a woman who was a dog breeder, and she was renowned for her beautiful hound dogs, and she bred them, raised them, trained them, and sold them. They were big dogs. They weren't small dogs like beagles. They were big dogs. I don't know what kind of dogs they were, but they were larger hound dogs. And she was very much an outdoors woman, would leave and just go off trekking through the mountain and hunt. And these people hunt as part of their food. It wasn't just hunting just for sport. They ate what they killed. So being an animal lover, it settled a little bit more easily with me. So she had evidently taken these dogs out. She took several dogs and went out hunting by herself. And what had happened, that the story I was told, was that the dogs took off and left. They just ran off and left. So she was going along and they didn't come back. She thought, well, that's it. She needed these dogs for coon hunting and whatever hunting she was doing. So she just went back home because they never came back. Well, the next day, one dog came back, and it was terrified, absolutely terrified. These were tough dogs. I mean, these were dogs that lived outside, and they were just very tough dogs. And this dog was uncharacteristically terrified and was cowering and hiding under the porch. And she thought, what on earth has happened? So she got a friend, and they went out. They took more dogs, and they went out looking for her dogs, and they found them. And unfortunately, these dogs had been ripped apart. I mean, they were just literally ripped apart. They were strewn about an area. I don't know that that something had eaten them. I was just told that they were ripped apart. It was just such a horrifying story to hear, being a dog lover and an animal lover. And I said, well, what would do that? And they said, well, a bear might. There's not many bear here. We've hunted them so much. They said, it's the panther. Everything got blamed on a supposed black panther that lived in the woods. And I said, a panther, because that didn't make sense to me. I knew this wasn't a habitat for a black panther, which is actually a melanistic leopard, a leopard with black pigmentation. They actually do have spots. You just don't see them. It's because the overall coloration is so dark that it appears black. And I thought, well, this isn't that kind of a place where a leopard would live. And I said that, and they said, no, it's a black panther. We've seen it. People here have seen it. And then I pushed for more information on that. Well, what have you seen? I said, well, it's just a big black shape, and it's fast. It's very fast. So they'd never really seen detail, but they blamed it all on this legendary black panther. They told me some more stories, that people had seen it, and I still was not convinced. They told me another story about a man that lived on the mountain farther over, and some of these houses were like a mile apart. And this man would take his horse. He would ride his horse into town, and he'd go to town and do his business and go to the bar and have some drinks and ride his horse back home. The trail up the mountain was forbidding. It was nothing more than just a couple of tracks in the road. Driving up was terrifying because you drive up this little rutted path, and on the right side it was just a drop straight down. So it was really scary going up. If another car had approached you coming the other way, you would have to back up all the way back down. So fortunately there was not much traffic on this road. But this man would ride his horse back and forth to town. Evidently one night he was riding back, and the horse at one point in the road became very skittish and nervous. And he had to control his horse. The horse wanted to bolt and was jumping around, and he was controlling the horse, and he didn't know what was going on. and then he heard something behind them, something heavy. It sounded like something heavy hit the ground behind him, and the horse screamed and kicked and took off and ran all the way home. Well, they got back to his house, and he took the horse into the barn and was taking the saddle off and was looking at the horse, and he found gouges, deep gouges on the horse's flank. And they blamed, of course, the panther. I don't think they knew what else to blame for these things, and that was the scapegoat. The panther was the scapegoat. So that was kind of an unusual thing. This poor horse was absolutely terrified. Another thing had happened that made me believe something really strange was going on. My husband's family was very large. There were 19 children in his family. So a lot of the families in Appalachia have many kids. He and his 19-year-old brother, my husband was about 21 at the time, his 19-year-old brother and two of the younger brothers, and I think they were around 11 and 13, the two younger brothers, had gone out on a hunting trip. They were going out not just to hunt, they were going out to have fun. They took, they packed a lot of stuff with them. They had food, things to drink. They took off late afternoon, and they were going out. Some of the areas around them were just so beautiful. There were beautiful ravines and deep gorges and high ridges and hollers. They called them hollers, hollows, depressions in the hillsides, in the mountains that were just thick with brambles and branches and so overgrown that they told me even in the wintertime you wouldn't see snow inside because it was so heavily overgrown. And a lot of the small animals would live in there because you couldn't get in there. So there were all of these different places on the mountain to be able to go past and look at. So they were going out and having a good time. And then they were going to be coon hunting later on that night. So they took dogs with them. They had hunting dogs too. They took off and they were gone. Well, it was close to midnight when they came flying back to the house. There was an area around the house that was kind of grassy, and then there was a big cornfield that ranged quite a ways back. I'm very bad with numbers, like how many feet or meters or yards, I don't know. But there was a big cornfield that went quite far back, and then the tree line with the woods that became progressively deeper. This was deep woods at that time. They come tearing across this cornfield, flew into the house, and were shaking like leaves. Even my husband, who had just finished combat training and was about to go to Vietnam, and had lived in this area and hunted in this area his whole life. They were very familiar with these backwoods. These were backwoods people. They knew that area. They were terrified. They were shaking, and my husband and his brothers, his older brother, his 19-year-old brother asked for whiskey, and they drank a shot of whiskey each, and they had tears in their eyes. They were really shaken up. So the rest of us were, what happened? They thought, did somebody get shot? What happened out there? And he told us that they were out having fun. They were just enjoying themselves. It got darker. They started hunting with the dogs, thought the dogs had treated coon a few times but lost it. And then at one point later on in that night, the dogs started acting a little strange. They were sniffing the air and he said they were crisscrossing back and forth and sniffing the air, just rapidly pacing back and forth. And then they just took off. They were gone. They didn't hear them again, didn't see them again. They were gone. So they continued on their way, continued walking back toward home. And my husband noticed he was hearing something around the perimeter of where this little group was walking, single file. He was hearing something. He said he would hear it to the right, and then he would hear it in back of them. He would hear it to the left and then in front. And he knew that meant something was circling them. But he couldn't figure out what it might be. Deer would certainly not do that because they were very afraid of people in the woods making noise with guns. They would flee as far as they could. He thought, this isn't a deer, and he said it almost sounded like a heavier footfall than a deer might be. So he got everybody in close, and he told his brother, I think something's circling us. Seeing my husband's reaction, his brother was immediately on guard. So they just continued walking. They said, well, we're not going to run. I guess running breakneck through the woods like that would get you killed. You'd run into something. It's a trail that they used. So they just quickly started walking, and he said it picked up its pace, whatever it was. It flanked them and then circled them. It just was going around them. And then at one point, they heard something heavy hit the ground in back of one of the kids at the end of the line. And this kid screamed, and they turned around. His brother turned around with the big spotlights, big flashlights that they had, and there was nothing there. And they kept shining these lights around. And when they'd hear a footfall, they'd shine the light in that direction, but they never saw anything. So they put the two kids in the middle, and my husband was in front, and his brother was at the rear. And they said, all right, we're just going to go very quickly. We're not going to run. Nobody run. We're just going to go right home. This is it. So they started going as quickly as they could, and this thing kept circling them. Now, by this time, my husband said he felt a very, very bad feeling. He couldn't explain it. He didn't know what this was, but it was not a good feeling. So they made it all the way to the edge of the woods and then ran through the cornfield. It was quite light. I don't know that there was a full moon, but it was a bright moon. And anybody that's been out in a rural area knows that the moon and starlight can be so bright it actually illuminates the ground. So they were able to see quite a bit. They broke through the tree line and just tore across this cornfield as fast as they could into the house. And it left them at that point. It never went into the cornfield. It left them at that point. So they got into the house and they were very shaken up. And of course they blamed it on cancer. I think that was just what they used to say because they had no other idea as to what it was. Nobody had ever reported that I knew of anything bipedal. It was just a black shape that they saw, evidently on floors. So they thought it was this black panther. That freaked them out so much. I've never seen my husband look like that. And they were so freaked out, the kids were crying, and even my husband had tears in his eyes. And he was certainly used to that country and was ready to go fight in Vietnam, and this shook him up. So that's something that really stuck with me all these years.
Considering the fact that you know as much about animals as you do, I'm sure you already knew that MO of circling them, making all that noise in the woods as it went around them out there, that does not mesh with behavior you would expect to see from either a jaguar or a mountain lion.
The thing that really hit home was at a couple of points he fired his gun. He shot out into the darkness where he was hearing this noise because he was saying, whoever you are, you better come out because you're going to get shot. Nobody responded, and he fired his gun in that direction. Any animal would have taken off at that point, I'm pretty sure. So I just thought that was so strange. There was something else that had happened in that time that I was down there. At night, one night, everybody was sleeping, and I heard just this huge roar, some kind of noise that I heard from out in the woods. And I thought it was really strange because it was so loud. I mean, I've heard a lot of strange noises coming from outside. I've lived near state parks, lived on 24 acres of land that bordered a state park in the state natural area. Many deer, fox, all kinds of animals, even timber wolves that came south in the winter from Wisconsin and that would follow the whitetail down and then go back up or go somewhere after winter. I've heard a lot of animals, and I know that foxes can sometimes sound so strange. They don't even sound like what you think a fox would sound like. And even deer make the most bizarre noises, especially in mating season. I've heard some strange noises from animals, and they don't scare me because I know this is normal. This is just their vocalizations. It's nothing strange. But this was so strange because it was so loud. Because normally when you hear animals in the wilderness like that outside, they're not that loud. The volume, the pitch is not that loud. This was loud, and it almost sounded like, it's difficult to describe, as if you blended several different animal sounds into one. I've thought about this over the years, and it may very well be because this terrain was so varied. There were ridges and gorges and ravines and hollers. There were all of these different topographical features. So it might have just been the way the sound carried from wherever it was that just made it sound like that. I've thought about that. I don't know what this could have been. And I told my husband the next day, and his family just started laughing, and they said, "Oh, it was probably the panther."
Oh, boy. The panther
Panther
again.
got blamed. Poor panther got blamed for everything. The probably non-existent panther got blamed for everything.
Well, you know how it is, Corrine. If you don't know how to explain something, then why not just blame it on something that's easy to blame it on? Another thing to consider, there are going to be quite a few people listening to this that are going to say, oh, it must have just been a black cougar. Case closed. Well, from what I know, I think there have been less than 4 confirmed cases in the history of the United States of melanistic cougars, in other words, ever being documented. And one important thing to know about those black cougars is, unlike a melanistic jaguar, i.e. a black panther, a melanistic cougar, for whatever reason, still has a lighter shaded belly. You'll see a dark back and rest of the body, whereas the belly, the underside, will still be noticeably light in color. If it was a black cougar out there that these people were seeing, I can't see how they wouldn't, in all the times they supposedly had seen this thing, I can't see them missing the fact that it had a white belly.
Also, I've done volunteer work with big cats in Sharon, Wisconsin. I live in far northern Illinois. Just over the border in Sharon, Wisconsin, there's a true sanctuary for rescued big cats. These are cougars, tigers, lions. They had some leopards there also. One black panther that I saw. And I did volunteer work there. I've cleaned their pens. I've fed them. Years ago at that time, I was able with some of them to actually, they would come up and rub against this heavy chain link, and I was even actually able to scratch them and scratch their heads. They've gotten very cautious with that because of incidents that have happened in other places in the United States, so they don't allow volunteers to do this anymore. But I was one of the volunteers that was able to do that. You had to be fast because if they turn their head quickly, just the sharpness of their fangs could sever fingers. So we were always very cautious. But these were amazing animals that had been at the end of the line. They were near death, many of them, when they were rescued and brought there. And the people who run this shelter, it's truly a shelter. I mean, their whole lives are devoted to taking care of these animals. And I was around cougars quite a bit at that point, and I would think back to the story that my husband told me. And I know that the size of what they were describing didn't mesh either. And I know that leopards, and even leopards, panthers, same animal, really don't get to be as big as they were describing. They were describing something that was large. They'll range anywhere from maybe 70 to 170 pounds, kind of like a mastiff-sized dog, when they get bigger. And their lifespan doesn't ring true either because they have these stories going on for many, many years, decades, about these panthers. Unless there was a breeding population, which is very hard to believe, I don't see how a panther would be that long-lived, because in the wild, they would live at the most maybe 15, 16, 17 years tops. That's a long life. In captivity, they would live that long. I don't think they would live long enough to be seen by the generations of people that were seeing them. My husband, unfortunately, he made it back from Vietnam, but he died very young. He was killed in a car accident when he was 26. So I didn't have the ability to keep talking to him about these stories and to learn more about them, because I would have liked to. The war interrupted a lot of things. We didn't really have the chance to talk much about this in the years that followed that, or I certainly would have asked him a lot more about it. But it's just nothing about the story about the Black Panther really made sense to me. So I really don't know, and I have no idea what it was that I heard that night. As I said, it might have just been just a weird echo and reverberation of noise with all that different topography, the way the land was there. It can really change how you hear things, what you hear. Sound changes in different situations, in different geological features or fog. All of those things can change what sound is like to you. So I really don't know what that was. I can't say it was a dogman or anything else because I had no idea.
You make really good points, as always. It's pretty doubtful that it could have been a Black Panther. It sure does make you wonder. There's another incident that we talked about involving Native American elders that came over to your house one day. Could you talk about that?
I was friends with a couple that were Native American. He was Mohican. He said, I'm Mohican, but I'm not the last one. I won't say their names for privacy. He has since passed away. And she was Oneida, of the Oneida Nation. He was a very talented artist, and some of his work is actually displayed in the Smithsonian Institute. And she was a Native American that did the most magnificent, exquisite beadwork, made beautiful dresses, deerskin dresses with intricate beadwork. And she taught dance, Native American dance, beautiful dance. She was actually a wonderful woman, a very beautiful woman. And they had come to my house and done a blessing, a beautiful ceremony, a cleansing with sage. And we had many conversations about things. And I had always questions about werewolves, what these things were. And I'd ask her one time, what do you believe about these things? We had many conversations about nature and the wilds and things like that. And I'd asked her, what's the Native American belief about this? And she said, well, we don't believe in werewolves the same way you do. We believe in two different things. They're two different creatures altogether. Two different beings. I'm sorry, she didn't say creatures, she said beings. She said a skinwalker is something different, and we don't really talk about that. And what you think of as a werewolf is a different kind of being, and we don't really discuss that with people outside of the nation, outside of our nation. And she told me, she said, I'll tell you this, and then I'll let it go. We won't talk about this again. She had been on a religious retreat. The nation that they belonged to was Menominee, up around Stockbridge, Wisconsin, and the tribe had actually built them housing so that they could come up there and be tribal elders and live and teach and be an active part of that community because they were so valued. They had a lot of information, a lot of knowledge. So she had gone up on sort of a religious retreat, and there was a medicine woman, somebody who was very, very skilled and knowledgeable. They don't talk about those things very much, so she didn't really elaborate. She said that they were going into the woods. She didn't tell me why or what the purpose was. She said, I can't tell you much about it, but we were going into the woods and we had to prepare ourselves for this. And we were told by this medicine woman, you need to keep your focus. We're going deep into the woods. We'll be there all night. And you must not allow yourselves to be distracted by what you see or what you hear. And you must maintain your focus and not allow any distraction. You must not pay this any attention. Do not pay these things any attention. Well, she didn't elaborate as to what they were saying, but we were talking about werewolves. And she was explaining to me this experience, so I understood this is what she meant. She said they went out into the woods, and they did. They maintained their focus, the preparation they had done to bring them to that point so that they could do so in any situation, and just went about their business and paid no attention to what was around them. And I said to her, did you see or hear these werewolf things around you? And she just kind of shrugged and didn't say any more. So I understood, because she had told me they can't really talk about them, that this is what she was speaking of. And I didn't press her for more information. It was a gift that she gave me that much. But I understood what she was saying. This was in deep woods. She said they had gone out into some very deep woods. And it was just the women alone going out on this, some type of ceremony that they were doing, some type of religious quest or ceremony or something that they were doing. And it took preparation before they went. So whatever was out there, whatever they encountered, was trying to distract them and was something that they had to prepare themselves in order to be able to deal with and to maintain their composure and to maintain their focus. So that leaves me wondering. I always thought about that too.
Oh, sure. It would make anyone wonder what they saw, heard, experienced that night. Sounds like a really good night to stay the heck out of the woods, huh?
But they do have, their belief was that these things did exist. I knew that.
Well, that's interesting. Well, Corrine, let's wrap this show up. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share with us?
Only that with all the things that I've learned and listened to about dogmen, I'm not so comfortable about being out alone in the woods anymore. I still enjoy them. I still love the woods, but I would never go in search of something like this. I don't believe these are things that are people that turn into wolves. I don't think that makes any sense. There's nothing about that has any credibility to me. Not knowing what they are, I think we need to give them a wide berth. Certainly learn more about them. But I really enjoy the efforts that you are making, Vic, in trying to get more experiences out there for people to hear and to try to understand more about these things. Thank you so much for letting me come on your show and tell my stories.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I'm glad you are. I really do appreciate it. Well, thanks for the good words again. Don't be a stranger, okay?
Absolutely not. Thanks so much, Vic.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you. Well, have a great night.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.